Which account should I make the host? Is it Franklin or Noben or Whiteword?
Let's do Franklin so that I can use that to admit people. But that one is on my handset. The Whiteword is on the laptop.
Is the one that has the host I will be able to share?
Okay, so the Whiteword.
Yeah.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for making it to this webinar this afternoon. You are very highly welcome. And like I did promise, we are starting right away. This is 10 minutes past 3. We needed to give some time for some people to join us. So I believe as we go along, every other person that needs to join, we join us wherever they meet us. So once again, thank you for giving us this time of your day to interact and to discuss this topic that I believe is very, very important. If you look around the society, home and abroad, you will understand that we have a situation in our hands, a growing pandemic. But the unfortunate thing is that many people are not talking about it, especially in developing countries. We tend to treat it as just one of those things. The places where they have even paid attention to it, they are not able to manage it effectively, let alone countries like ours, especially in Africa, where these things are not even second place or third place. We are still grappling with the basic necessities of life to pay attention to these things. However, the fact that we neglect it does not mean it will go away. The fact that we neglect it does not mean it is not a problem. And we are faced with the challenge every day in our society, which is why I thought it was necessary for us to bring it to the fore, especially for those of us who manage children, either at home or in the place of work. Maybe you are a teacher, a school owner, a school administrator, or maybe you manage children in some other capacities, either as a daycare person or whatever way. You deal with children, adolescents, and you need to understand what we are facing or how these things portend a possible crisis in no distant time. If we pay attention to what is going on in, for instance, the United States, just this week on Tuesday here, a young child or a man, let me say, of about 19 took gun into a children's school in Louisiana and shot several students. Some were injured and about 3 of them lost their life, including the shooter. Now, this is a problem that needs to be tackled. So we don't know what could have caused that situation, but it is a problem that needs to be tackled. Over there, they are paying attention to it, and yet they are still not able to handle it, let alone here. So we have these people everywhere in our streets. We call them social misfits. We call them all sorts of names, area boys, street urchins, and all whatnot. But there is a growing situation that we need to face and tackle effectively. If we don't do that, we will be faced with a crisis that we may not be able to handle. And it is not something that will end up only in the streets. It will come to our homes, it will come to our schools, it will come to churches, to mosques, everywhere. So that is why we need to start talking about it. And in our own little way, whatever we can do to solve the situation, to curb it. We may not be able to solve it entirely, but we can, to a large extent, minimize it. And the ways to do so are the things that we want to discuss in this webinar. So once again, I welcome you and appreciate you for considering this important enough to warrant some maybe minutes or hours of your time. So we will dive right in, and during the course of the webinar, we'll be taking questions, interactions, any form of reaction that you may have, or anything that you consider important that you want to throw up for us to discuss. We'll likely take them. All right, before we go on, I just want us to take a few minutes to get to know one another, to just interact. Maybe somebody just drop in the chat section, let us know where you are reaching us from, and just your name and your location will be nice, so that we'll just get to know those that we're interacting with. So you can start by saying, this is my name, this is what I do, and this is where I'm reaching you from, so that we can just familiarize. I don't want to be talking to strangers, and I believe you don't want to be treated as one. So let's get to know ourselves. Just drop in the chat section your name, your profession, and what the states that you are reaching us from. Just quickly, let's just get to know each other, and then we'll take it on from there. Okay, so I can see Mrs. Christy Olawale from Omoku in Rivers State. This is school owner. Thank you very much, ma'am, for joining us. I believe that your students will thank you for being part of this webinar. Whatever you learn from here will impact in how you run your school and how you manage the children at your school. So we want to meet others, just your name, your profession, and also your location. All right, we are waiting. Name, location, and just what you do so that we can get to know each other. Let's interact. This is the part where we just get to know one another before we move in. Because before we know it, we are gone way into the webinar and we're not able to come back to this. So I'd like to know us before we move on. So just drop in the chat section, just open the chat, just state your name, your profession, and the states, or just the state where you are joining us. Okay, so we have another person from Olawumi Onoben. She's a teacher joining from Lagos, Nigeria. Thank you for joining us. We have Mrs. Abimbola Ali, an administrator, a principal, joining us from Lagos. Thank you very much for joining us. Let's keep it coming. Let's keep it coming. Just your name, location, what you do. All right, I'm waiting just one more minute before we move on. We have more people in the house. They have not introduced themselves. All right, so while we wait for them to do so, I will go on and introduce myself. So my name is Onoben Franklin. I'm popularly known on social media everywhere as TCP White. And the history to that name is quite a long one, so I will skip that for now. But TCP is an acronym that stands for Teacher, Counselor, and Preacher. And that is because those are the three areas of my calling and profession. I am an ordained preacher of the gospel. I hold a diploma in theology. I also am a certified guidance counselor. I graduated with the bachelor's in education in guidance counseling from the University of Ibadan, and then also proceeded to studying educational psychology at the University of Lagos. So I have worked severally or in several places as a guidance counselor. I've worked with the Association of Christian Schools International as the Assistant National Administrator. I've also worked as the administrator at a teacher training college. I've also worked as the head of administration at a nursery and primary school in Lekki, Lagos, and a school manager. I'm currently a student advisor, and these are my career journey so far. And the area where I am most passionate about is guidance counseling, because that is my first love, that is my calling, that is where I believe I have my greatest strength. And this is part of what I do to ensure that guidance counseling is not limited to just where I work. The whole idea of this webinar is to take my profession beyond the four walls of my immediate employment, to reach out to people, because there is information that a lot of people do not have. Several schools don't have guidance counselors. Several schools, even where they do not have trained guidance counselors. What they just do is have teachers who double as guidance counselors. And even where they have guidance counselors, they have encumbered them so much with teaching load that they do not have the time to focus on the nitty-gritty of guidance counseling. So there is a lot that guidance counseling can do for our children and teenagers in schools, especially at the primary and secondary level. But it seems that many schools are overlooking that. We just want to employ the basic staff and move on. So I have taken it upon myself to do my bit to ensure that the information about guidance and counseling does not end in just where I work, but also go beyond that. So that's why I'm doing this. Earlier on in the month, I think it was last month, I did a webinar that I was titled The Right Brain and the Left Brain and the Implications for Teaching and Learning. And I'm also doing this, which is the mental health of the children in the learning space and even at home. So I intend to continue to do this from time to time, and I hope that you continue to join me. The whole idea is to share information that will equip you to be able to assist these children, because if we solve a lot of problems at their level, at the childhood or adolescenthood level, we will not have so much to deal with at adulthood. So we have a few other persons who have dropped their introduction. Mrs. Mba Chinonye, she's a secretary. She's joining us from Lagos. And we have another person, Collins, is also joining us from Abuja. Collins is, I know, is a consultant and a trainer. Is also into education. He's been a school leader for many years and is joining us from Abuja. So I'm happy to have all of you here. As you can see from my slide, I have a few of my experience areas, the areas where I've worked or we have led one ministration or the other, or one training or the other. You can see I've led staff devotion at Dancehall High School, which is in Ikeja here. I've also led training at ACSI National Office in Ikeja also. I've also led training or handled trainings at Baptist High School at Abuja, and then also trainings at Covenant Child Academy at Ajah, another one at EHD Catholic School, EHD Model College at Benin City, and then also another one at Ojodubega. So with this, we go around, we try to equip people, sensitize them, equip school owners, school administrators, to give them adequate information to be able to know what is at stake in terms of raising children in the right way. So let's move on. So what we'll be covering in these 2 days, remember this webinar is a 2-day webinar. And the reason why it's 2 days is because if we decide to pack everything into one day, we'll not be able to cover so much, or probably we'll have to take so much of your time. And I don't want this to extend beyond 2 hours max. So we have a lot to cover. In fact, while I was doing the research for this webinar, there was a lot of information I came across, but I just had to stick with what is important so that we do not overload. The essence of this is not to make anybody a lecturer or to gain what's it called, certificate at the end of the program, maybe like you go through a bachelor's degree. So we want to give you just the basics that you need to be able to assist students at home and in schools. If you desire more information, you can always reach out to me and we'll share more, or you can go online and maybe the areas of interest that you have come across during this webinar, you can then do further research on them. I need to mention here that mental health, has a lot. There's a lot that, has been done on mental health. In fact, I believe it should be a 4-year course that people should study strictly mental health, not adjoined with any other one. There's not less than 300 mental health disorders, not less than. There's a body that is charged with, categorizing them or identifying them and giving them their identities or their names. And the last I checked, they said it is not less than 300, and it's still counting. They are still discovering more. And as they are discovering, they are adding to the list. So we can't cover all 300 of them. We're only going to take the ones that are important as far as the information that we want to share in this webinar is concerned. And as we share, we believe that it will help every one of us to improve on our services to students and all whatnot. So at this webinar, we'll be, sorry, I need to admit people as they come in. So at this webinar, we'll be looking at mental health disorders. We'll be doing a deep dive into mental health. We'll look at other related terms. Everything around mental health will be discussed as much as possible. Remember, like I said, we can't cover everything, but we'll look as much as possible. We'll try to touch the basic information that you need. I've tried as much as possible to garner all the information that I believe is relevant for today. And then we'll look at other related terms. And then after that, we'll look at the causes and the signs or the symptoms of mental health. It is important that we look at those signs. When can you say that somebody is having a mental health disorder? That is very, very important information that you need to have so that we don't go around labeling people. It is important. And then after that, we'll go into intervention programs. What are the intervention programs that are available? How can you and I, at our basic level, intervene? There's what we call first aid in health. So those things, as we have them in physical health, we also have first aid in mental health. So it is not only physical health that we have first aid. What are the things that you and I can do, even at home or in school, to ensure that children or adolescents do not go from simple or mild cases to chronic or severe cases? And then we'll also look at the roles and the tasks of parents and educators. How have we contributed to the situation? What can we do differently to reverse the course? So that is the much that we'll be looking at in these 2 days. And I believe and trust God that we'll be able to cover as much as possible. So before we start, let's just look at this picture and just drop for me in the chat room. Which one of these three do you think has a mental health disorder? Which one of these three would you regard as having a mental health disorder? Just drop a chat, either the A or B or C, just use any one. So let's have your contribution. Which one do you think will be diagnosed as one having mental health disorder? Okay, so somebody said the green one, really? Why do you think so? The green one. All right, so who else wants to agree or disagree? Which ones do you think, if they were to be diagnosed, or which one do you think by face value is having mental health disorders or mental health illness, as the case may be? Okay, so St. Colin says the red one. Another person says the red one. Okay, so Mr. Bimbola says the eyes is upside down. That's why she thinks he's having or she's having a mental health disorder. All right, so again, there's no right or wrong answers. As we go on in the course of the webinar, we will find out which one is right or which one is wrong, or maybe all of them is right and all of them is wrong. Because again, one thing that we must keep in mind is, like we say, there are very few sicknesses or illnesses or diseases that shows on the face. So, but the whole idea of mental health is to move us from, this red picture to the green picture. This person may be feeling down and having a frown. The whole idea of mental health is to move one from this state to the state where he or she is happy with himself. That being said, it also doesn't mean that people who are always smiling does not have mental health disorder. So it is possible that the one who is wearing a frown may not necessarily have a mental health illness, because as you will see as we go along, there is the normal disposition towards these issues of life. That you are feeling down or sad or wearing a frown or disappointed by one thing or the other does not necessarily mean that you have a mental health disorder. Or one who has a neutral disposition, as the orange one suggests, may also either have or not have a mental health disorder. While someone who is always smiling or wearing a good disposition at the outward look may also have or not have mental health disorder. So these things are things that we will consider as we go along. And it's important that we pay attention to this, because one of the mistakes that we make in life, especially when it comes to psychology, is labeling. So we need to be careful not to label people, especially when we have not done the proper diagnosis to find out exactly what the situation is. One of the challenges we have in this part of the world is self-medication in almost everything. And to a large extent, we have transferred that also to mental health. We just see people who have one challenge or the other. It may just be a normal bad day at work or school, and we just label them. So, but we'll find out how we are able to arrive at the conclusion that this person have this situation or that situation as we move on in this webinar. All right. So today we'll start with mental health disorders. We'll look at mental health disorders. We'll look at mental health illnesses. Are they the same? Are they different? We'll look at the terms psychosis and other related terms. What are they? How do they apply to the issues that we are looking at? All right, so we'll dive in quickly. So let's look at the definition of terms. How do we define these things that we refer to as mental health? Excuse me. So mental health refers to a person's emotional, social, and psychological wellness. Everything that has to do with your mind, excluding your body, is what we refer to as mental health. Unfortunately, we live in a society where until something affects us physically, we do not pay attention to them. We tend to just wade through the storm or wade through the water when our health, our mental health is calling for attention. Everything that happens to a person always gives a sign, whether it is physical or mental. There's always a warning sign, but we tend to ignore them until it reaches a crisis point. That's when we begin to take the necessary step that we would have taken. We always quote that statement or that mantra which says prevention is better than cure. We say it, but we don't do anything about it. Very many of us pay little attention to our emotional, social, and psychological wellness. And then also we translate that to the children. So a child near us is showing signs of an illness that is just brewing, and we continue to ignore them until it becomes a crisis point, it reaches a crisis point. So it affects how we think and how we feel and how we act, how we relate to others and handle stress, which is the normal stress of life. That is what mental health encompasses. Everything around all of these things that we just talked about is what mental health encompasses. So you will see that excluding physical health, everything else comes under mental health. How we think, how we feel, and how we act is part of our mental health. So I don't know why on earth we will choose to ignore this or relegate it to the background and just focus primarily only on physical health, especially in this part of the world. So mental health is important from childhood through adulthood, especially when we consider the fact that our childhood experiences most often than not, shape our lives at adulthood. So everything we go through at childhood, most often than not, shape our adulthood. Sigmund Freud, one of the known psychologists, that pioneered psychoanalysis, said in his research on his postulations that everything a person will become in life, the foundation is laid at the first 5 years of that person's life. So everything that you and I will become, according to Sigmund Freud, the foundation is laid at the first 5 years. So if we take that to relate with what we're discussing, most of our childhood experiences, the fixations, the deprivations, and the experiences we go through later on in life begin to play out. Most of the things that he did, most of the work that he did, that is Sigmund Freud, as a psychoanalyst, were majorly hinged on people's repressed memory, something that we're going to see as we go on. So a lot of people have had experiences in their childhood which they have repressed, and is now beginning to affect their disposition, their thinking, their feeling, their judgments at later stage in life. And then when they go for treatment, one of the ways he tried to help them is to subject them to deep psychodynamics, helping them to sort out or search in their memory, their subconsciousness, all those experiences that they have tucked away in their subconscious that is now playing out as adults. So some of these things are things that as we do further research, we will see and we will then begin to discover how it affects us every day in our lives. We go through certain things in our childhood, we suppress them. We push them down to the base or the basement of our subconsciousness. And then later on in life, we begin to act out those things. We judge people based on our previous experiences. Somebody who had a very nasty childhood experience begin to judge everybody that he or she meets later on in life based on that previous experience, because he or she has not gone through the process of overcoming or getting that pain or that injury out of their subconscious. So one of the things we don't do in this part of the world is to ventilate our emotions, ventilate our feelings. We dismiss everything. We throw them away. We feel that it doesn't count, it doesn't matter. But eventually in our lives, later on, it begins to play out, playing out in how we think, playing out in how we judge situations in life, playing out in how we interact with others, how we judge others. So all of these things are what mental health has to, it concerns with. So everything that has to do with how we think, how we feel, and how we act, how we interact with others, how we handle everyday stress, something that should just be an ordinary experience. Some people react extremely about it. Something has triggered such, and that is what mental health is concerned about. So we have looked at mental health. What is mental illness? Any illness that has a psychological origin with symptoms of either emotional distress or abnormal behavior. That is mental illness. Any illness that originates from our psyche, from our mind, that is what we refer to as mental illness. So we have looked at mental health. Now we're talking about mental illness. Mental health does not necessarily mean that everything is okay. We're just saying that everything around all of that is what refers to mental health. The state of your emotions, the state of your thoughts, the state of your reaction or your behavior. Now, when we say a person has a mental illness, we are referring to an illness that originates from one's psyche, from one's mind, that has symptoms that relate to his or her emotional distress or abnormal behavior. Many people have mental health concerns from time to time. So, but it becomes a mental illness when ongoing signs and symptoms causes frequent stress and affect one's ability to function. So it is important that we note this, like I alluded to earlier. It is not the everyday sadness, the everyday reaction to what we go through, that is termed as mental illness. It has to be a consistent pattern of symptoms. So one needs to show a consistent pattern of distress before we can conclude that he or she has mental illness. Excuse me. So when we say that somebody has mental illness, the person must show that after several days or weeks of observation, there is a consistent pattern of dysfunction in that person's life, where the person's ability to function normally is impaired. That is when we can conclude to say that this person has a mental illness. We are going to differentiate between mental illness and developmental challenges. There are some children that have developmental challenges, like those who are born with autism. Those autism is a developmental challenge. We have those who have cerebral palsy, and it affects their behavior, it affects their ability to learn, it affects them in how they interact with others. Those things are not necessarily mental illness. They are developmental challenge because it's a biological situation. It did not originate from their mind. It originated from the way their brain or their bodies develop. So there's a slight difference in the both, and we need to be careful so that we do not label people wrongly. So that's why we need to add a word of caution in most of these things. So autism is not necessarily a mental illness. Even though some of the signs show like mental illness, it is not, because it is a developmental situation. Children are naturally born with it. Mental illness rather is something that develops from exposure to environments. So we will find that as we go on under courses. And then a good mental health involves being able to manage daily stress. So when a person shows a consistent pattern of an inability to manage everyday stress, the person is said to have a mental illness or mental health disorder. So it is not that I am tired today, I have mental illness. I can be tired, I can be stressed out, maybe from work or home or any other activity. Once I take a nap or I'm able to get a break from whatever it is and I refresh myself, I come back with vigor to face the day. But it is not the same as a person who every single day shows a consistent pattern of being stressed out by something that every other person considers little or nothing. So that is what mental illness is about. We will throw more light as we go on. Then we have what is called psychotic disorders. Psychotic disorders are severe mental disorders that causes abnormal thinking and perception. Now, psychosis, which is something that we're going to look at later, is a symptom of many other mental health situations or mental health disorders. So people with psychotic disorders manifest a range of symptoms, including paranoia, self-harm, suicidal thoughts, etc. This is why we need to pay attention to these things, because when we leave mental health untreated, the person or the individual have the tendency to either hurt themselves or harm others. And we see that every day. Like I made an example earlier while I was introducing, somebody just takes gun and goes into a school and shoots other people. Now, we don't know the experience that he or she have had in that institution, but that is how he chose to express himself in a society where they consider themselves free and gun ownership is relatively free. But in this part of the world, we don't have the freedom to own guns, so we don't necessarily have that liberty here. But there are other ways that people are manifesting their frustrations or manifesting what we consider as mental health. And that is why it is important for us to look at it. So they either harm themselves or harm others. So psychotic disorders are distinguishable psychological conditions that can be debilitating. For example, it's schizophrenia, which is one of the most popular psychotic disorders. So as we go on, we'll see examples of this. We're just laying the foundation, just try to make us understand some of the terms that we'll be coming across. Then what is psychosis? Like I mentioned earlier, psychosis is not the same as psychotic disorder. It is the symptom of several mental health disorders, including psychotic disorders, and may occur in other unrelated conditions, for instance, substance abuse, brain tumors, and strokes. So psychosis is a condition where people, begin to see things that are not there. It is a state of altered reality. So psychosis refers to a break from reality characterized by delusions and hallucinations and disorganized speech or behavior. So this is one of the major symptoms of many mental health disorders, the severe ones particularly, that a lot of people have what we refer to as a break from reality. Hallucination, delusions, hallucination, which is seeing or hearing voices or saying things that doesn't seem to be real where others are concerned. You may be in the midst of others and you are saying things. For those of us in Africa, we know that we consider this as people seeing ghosts. But the scientists call it psychosis. The person is hallucinating, is seeing things that is not real, that is not there. So he or she may be seeing images or hearing voices which are not real. And then also delusions, which is the firm belief in something that is unrealistic. For instance, the person may believe that somebody is calling their name or somebody is trying to harm them, and they are always apprehensive, they are always running, they're always afraid to interact with others. They may be watching television and then they may be telling other people that somebody in the TV is sending them message. So some of those, belief system that is not real, that every other person knows to be untrue, the person holds firmly to it and is beginning to affect how they relate with others or how they function. These things can go from mild to severe cases and can affect how people, interact or socialize, either at school or at work or at home. So all of these things are part of why we need to look at it and discuss it. And then we also have disorganized speech. Now, there are people who maybe as a result of medication may come down with psychosis. Those are temporary cases. Somebody may take an injection that is quite heavy, and a medication that is quite heavy, and then we alter with their brain chemistry, and they will begin to hallucinate or say certain things that is disorganized. And when the person regains their consciousness or comes to, you tell them that you were saying things like this, they can't remember. That is a brief period of psychosis. Those ones are medical related. They are not the same as symptoms of mental health disorder. So we are saying that there are psychosis related to when people have strokes or brain tumors or medications or drug abuse, where people who take ingest some drugs that alters with their body chemistry, and then they begin to have the symptoms of psychosis. There are also cases where people, as a result of mental health disorders, especially psychotic disorders, experience this psychosis, which is a major symptom of psychotic disorders. So as we go on, when we begin to list out the different types of mental health disorders, we will see where psychosis come under and which other ones, and how we can be able to manage such situations. All right, so the major areas that we need to focus on in this webinar, which is the one that I believe will concern most of us at home and in school, is what we refer to as behavioral disorder. Behavioral disorders are the normal, behavioral challenges that children come up with. So behavioral disorders refers to a pattern of disruptive or destructive behaviors. And you and I will agree that children naturally have these tendencies to be disruptive or destructive. It becomes a disorder, like we have mentioned earlier, when it begins to show a consistent pattern. Naturally, children tend to be disruptive or destructive. It is the nature of children, especially because they do not understand the importance of many things. But when this becomes a consistent pattern of behavior, it is said to be a behavioral disorder and needs to quickly be attended to before it gets out of hand. So you have a child in school, for instance, like the picture you are seeing here, where a child just naturally likes to disrupt activities. A child cannot sit still in class. A child cannot, does not listen to instructions, does not show the inclination to behave in certain ways like others. There are individual differences, but it is not a case or an excuse for children to consistently be disruptive or destructive, destroying school properties or destroying properties at home every time he or she is showing. Once that becomes a consistent pattern, you need to find a psychotherapist or a psychiatrist that will diagnose the child and look at what the root cause could be so that you can quickly tame that. Because if a child grows with such, it becomes, a pattern even at adulthood. And, when they continue destroying things, maybe little things at home, you don't consider it important. As they grow with it, they'll move on to greater things. And then only God knows what that could lead them to later on in life. So while mental illnesses manifest as behavioral disorders, not all behavioral disorders result from mental illness. Behavioral disorders include substance abuse, eating disorders, gambling addiction, sex addiction, and ADHD, which is the attention deficit hyperactive disorder, opposition defiant disorder, and conduct disorder. So children, the last two they talked about, children who are just, defiant to authorities. They just don't want to take any instruction. So it can happen once in a while, but once it becomes a consistent pattern of a child's behavior, then it needs to be looked into seriously. Conduct disorder is also a case that needs to also be taken seriously if it becomes consistent. A child is never able to sit still, to learn, or to pay attention to instructions or anything. The whole group is going right, he is decided to go left. Something may be at the root of it and needs to be taken into consideration before it gets out of hand. Another one that we need to pay attention to is something we call mental breakdown. Mental breakdown, also known as nervous breakdown, is a term that refers to difficult emotional experiences leading to severely negative thoughts. So where somebody just breaks down mentally, not physically now, he or she just cannot handle stress anymore. Maybe the pressure has gotten up to the person's crisis point where he or she can no longer take it, and it just breaks down. Either it breaks down weeping, breaks down. The manifestation can come in different ways, but people express themselves in different ways when they have a mental breakdown. So it is often used to denote an emotional crisis, which may stem from mental health crises such as depression or anxiety, and may lead to other mental situations or mental illnesses. The causes and symptoms are similar to mental illnesses. So somebody can continue to bottle up things. Like I mentioned earlier, we do not ventilate. We don't have a culture of ventilating our feelings in this part of the world. Even those who tend to do so, we shut them down, as we're going to find out as we go along. So we allow people to continue to bottle things up until it gets to a point where they can no longer bottle it, and then there's an eruption. So that eruption can come in different ways. People start yelling or shouting, go into a fit of rage, or just lash out at people, either at childhood or adolescence, either amongst friends or whatever. People who have gone through some experiences previously and have gotten to a point where they can no longer take it. So such people need sympathy and not outrage. We need to be able to help them immediately, because if it is not managed, if instead of sympathizing with them, instead of giving them the help that they need, especially at that crisis point, everybody turns against them and lash out at them and begin to say, why are you behaving like this? Are you the only one? Things like, very uncaring statements that we make in this part of the world, we may drive that person into, further down into the spectrum of mental illness. So mental breakdown can just be a one-off, but if we don't handle it well, it can lead to mental illness. It can lead to a state of, deeper depression. It can lead to other crises that one may not be able to explain. So Let's just quickly look at some mental health statistics in Nigeria. You know, sometimes while I was making research in this, I shared some posts on my social media. A lot of persons think that mental illness is something that happens out there in the Western world. And that is because they pay more attention to it than we do over here. So we have come to the conclusion that it is more of a Western situation than, you know, local or back home. But in the course of my research, I found out that it is not the case. There are many situations that we can relate with, or many authorities that have given some statistics about the situation of mental health in Nigeria. One of such, Premium Times published a report in October 2021 that says 1 in 4 Nigerians is suffering from mental illness. 1 in 4 Nigerians. If you do the math, that is given our current population or estimated population, that is an excess of 50 million Nigerians are living with mental health illness, according to Premium Times, the published report in 2021. Also, Professor Taiwo Obindo, which is the president of the psychiatric profession of Nigeria, he says that more than 60 million Nigerians are suffering from mental illness. Still not far from what we have looked at earlier. And that report was released in September 2022, which is just last month here. Again, another research, ICIRNigeria.com, in January 2022 says that drug abuse and sickness of the mind are major causes of mental illness in Nigeria. And then again, in October 2019, Al Jazeera, the English version, released a report where they said that Nigeria ranks number 1 in depression in Africa. Nigeria ranks number 1 in depression in Africa, and they are 15th in the world in the rate of suicide, the suicide frequency. So what this does is that it throws the importance of this subject. It brings to the fore the fact that we need to discuss this more often at homes, in the places of worship, and other forums at the school levels. And then we also need to take the mental health of the students or learners very serious, or the children that we are raising very serious, including that of our own. We need to pay more attention to this so that we do not allow situations to go from bad to worse. All right, I had to drink a bit of water. Thank you for the understanding. So what are the different types of mental illness that are available? So generally, mental illness is broken down into 2 broad types. All the mental illnesses are categorized into 2 broad types. There are those that are categorized under psychosis and those that are categorized under neurosis. So from what we can see, mental illness, psychosis refers to major mental disorders characterized by severe symptoms such as disturbed reality, which is psychosis. Psychosis is the break from reality, where people see things that is not there, hear voices that are not there, that are not real, also hold on to beliefs that are unfounded, like somebody is trying to harm me, or like somebody loves me, and then begin to act out those things, or they begin to manifest distorted speeches. Whilst neuroses are the less severe of them all, and then they are the more treatable mental disorders involving symptoms of stress, etc. So all the mental illnesses that we have, most of them come under these 2. So it's either they are the normal everyday, stressors or stressful behaviors, or depression that you can easily talk through and overcome, or the ones that has that requires more deep intervention, where just psychotherapy may not be enough. You need to also go for psychiatric intervention, and a talking therapy will be combined to help the person overcome his or her situation. Then we will look at them now in detail. So what I have done here is try to break down all the mental health disorders and put them in categories. Like I explained earlier, there are over 300 and still counting that have been identified mental health disorders, over 300. And they are still discovering the more and adding to the list. So we cannot discuss every one of them. We are only going to discuss the areas that affect us that we consider, because if you study on mental health, they are the ones that are popular, the ones that people tend to come down more frequently with. And research has shown that the most, or the two most popular mental health disorders are depression and anxiety. Depression and anxiety. And the both of them falls within the areas that we're going to be discussing. So we have anxiety disorder. So we have anxiety disorder. And under anxiety disorder, we have obsessive compulsive disorder. Obsessive compulsive disorder, which is the manifestation of, always, one who is obsessed with trying to check and to ensure that things are in good condition. For instance, with the world is just coming out from COVID, there are people who, while suffering from OCD, which is the obsessive compulsive disorder, will continue to, avoid touching surfaces or continue to clean to just to prevent them from coming down with illness. There's the normal behavior of, ensuring that your environment is clean. But when you begin to see germs everywhere, you are always obsessed with cleaning, trying to prevent. That is, the extreme state. So the extreme state of, being conscious of death or stuff around you, that is what we refer to as the obsessive compulsive disorder. So let me just read through a few notes that will enlighten us about what we're discussing. So mental anxiety disorder is a mental health disorder that is characterized by feelings of worry, anxiety, or fear that are strong enough to interfere with everyday's activity. Remember, we have said earlier, and it's something I have to continue to repeat, there is the normal worry in life. Everybody worries about several things. But when that worry or fear or anxiety begins to interfere with your everyday function, begins to affect the way you relate with people, that you are not able to relate freely, or you are not able to carry on everyday activity, it is said to be a mental health disorder. So a mental health disorder is the case when the situation interferes or disrupts your everyday functioning. That is when we can say that there is a mental health disorder. So when you look at a child or an individual and the person either is suffering from anxiety disorder, you need to be able to differentiate if it is a normal worrying or fear of whatever, or that this person have gone overboard with it. So when the situation begins to interfere with one's daily activities, the person is said to have an anxiety disorder. For example,
àwọn ọmọ mẹ́wàá yẹn lọ bá mi kó wọn wá, kó máa gbéra wọn. Àwọn ọmọ mi mẹ́wàá, ask them to follow you.
All right. I needed to mute somebody that was disturbing there. So please just try to keep yourself muted so that we can have a free flow. Examples of anxiety disorder rather include panic attacks, obsessive compulsive disorders, post-traumatic stress disorders, and all whatnot. So there is what we refer to as the generalized anxiety disorders. A generalized anxiety disorder is an anxiety disorder that is characterized by chronic anxiety, exaggerated worry, and tension, even when there is little or nothing to provoke it. Somebody is just worried over nothing. So if it becomes consistent, the person is having what we refer to as generalized anxiety disorder. It's not a specific area, it's not targeted or not stimulated by a specific situation, but it's just generally worried, and you can't place a finger on what the situation is about. So the person is suffering from generalized anxiety disorder. We may spiritualize these things, but they are mental health situations that needs to be checked. The person can do with a bit of counseling there's what we refer to as the cognitive therapy, where the person is helped to understand how his or her thought pattern or thought processes is interfering with the way he or she lives his or her life. And when they are able to diagnose that and see through, talk through that process, he or she may, be able to overcome that situation. So I have mentioned obsessive compulsive disorders, which is an anxiety disorder that is characterized by recurrent and unwarranted thoughts, obsessions, or repetitive behaviors or compulsions, such as hand washing, counting, checking, or cleaning, and which are often performed with the hope of preventing obsessive thoughts. The person is just constantly afraid. Oh, my hands are dirty. You go and wash it. As you come out, it's still dirty. You wash it. You come out. Or you're just obsessed with cleaning. You just don't want to. So that's constant fear that people are living with, and then they constantly are obsessed with doing things to prevent what they are afraid of. That is what is referred to as obsessive compulsive disorder. There are people who are also suffering from what we refer to as panic disorder, which is an anxiety disorder that is characterized by an unexpected and repeated episodes of intense fear. Somebody will just naturally just come down unexpectedly with intense fear. He just feels that, oh, something is going to happen, or something has happened, or without any cause, just become afraid. So that person may be reacting to something that has happened to them in the past, or something unrelated entirely. It's a panic disorder. You just on a fleet of fear, you just go into shock and fear, and then you begin to run helter-skelter. Everybody around you are just worried. They don't know how to help you, because until that episode passes, the person will be in that state. So it can also have some physical symptoms, which include chest pains, heart palpitation, shortness of breath, dizziness, and abdominal distress. So panic disorder is another form of anxiety disorder. We have post-traumatic stress disorder. This is as a result of previous experience. People who have gone through some hazardous or some traumatic experience in their life, either accidents or robbery attack or rape attempts or rape incidents, or maybe a violent attack on them or somebody they love or know, anything whatsoever. And then they have bottled something up. They have tried to suppress that emotion. Like I mentioned, we do not ventilate things in this part of the world. We suppress it, we repress it, or we just wish it away. We feel that, oh, I've overcome it. We don't have the culture of sitting with somebody and talking through our experiences and find what we call closure. So what we do is that we just push those things down to the bottom of our subconsciousness. And then maybe when a similar situation reoccurs in future, you see that thing being triggered, and then we'll now live through 7 weeks or months of PTSD. These things happen every day in our society, and we continue to either spiritualize these things or wish it away. So when people go through situations that are traumatic, the best way to help them is to sit with a counselor, sit with somebody who cares, somebody who is not judging, and talk them through. A girl has been raped or attempted rape. The whole family, instead of helping him or her to talk through that process, we because we don't want the family name to be shamed, we bury the situation. We tell her it's because of the way she dressed, because of this. We blame the victim instead of helping her to overcome that situation. And then the person then finds a way to suppress that emotion, that feeling. And then eventually in life, that thing will continue to play out. Anybody who touches her suddenly, it triggers that PTSD. So when we allow people to ventilate, either by sitting with a professional counselor or a family member who loves the person and will not judge you, but listen to you and guide you and help you to ventilate your feelings and talk you through those things, we then find closure. We don't have to blame the victim when things happen. So these things that we do are things that continue to play out these situations in our society. So a lot of people are going through PTSD as a result of whatever childhood experiences they've had, either as a result of abuse or accidents, or maybe they've witnessed a violent act, and those things have been registered in their minds. Now it begins to continues to play out every day in their life because we don't have the culture, or we don't even value the culture of ventilating our problems in this world. We have social phobias as part of anxiety disorders. So all of these things are part of anxiety disorder. Social phobia, where people are just afraid to interact, to mingle with people. You are afraid, like we have people who have stage fright. Those are social phobia. You see them, some people have extreme cases where their knees begin to shake, their voices are shaking, they can't speak in public, they can't interact. When you bring some people to a public function, they can't stay there. So some of these things are, examples of anxiety disorders. We also have mood disorders, which is another one that we have there. Mood disorders are mental health conditions that primarily affect your emotional state. It's a disorder in which you experience long periods of extreme happiness, sometimes, or extreme sadness, or sometimes a combination of both. Certain mood disorders involve other persistent emotions such as anger or irritability. It is normal for your mood to change once in a while, like I've always mentioned. Those things are normal. You can be happy today, sad tomorrow. Things may happen that make you sad. However, for a mood disorder to be diagnosed, symptoms must be persistent for several weeks or longer. Mood disorders can cause changes in your behavior and can affect the ability to perform routine activities such as work or study at schools. So two of the most common mood disorders are depression and bipolar disorder. So depression, like we have discussed, is the major one is clinical depression, which is the common mental health condition. Depression it has a symptoms of which include feelings of hopelessness. When a person suddenly feels hopeless about life, the person is said to be depressed. So the condition can cause difficulty with thinking, memory, eating, and sleeping. For a person to receive a diagnosis of clinical depression, symptoms must last for at least 2 weeks. So we have postpartum depression, we have persistent depression, persistent depressive disorder, we have seasonal affective disorder, which is a depression that comes as a result of the change in season. If it's rainy season, some people become depressed. Maybe when the rainy season passes, they are brighter again. So they have depression with psychosis. All of these are parts of mood disorder. Then we have bipolar disorder, which is a lifelong mood disorder and mental health condition that causes intense shifts in mood or energy levels, thinking patterns, and behavior. There are a few types of bipolar disorder which involve experiencing significant fluctuations in moods and are referred to as hypomanic or manic and depressive episodes. So bipolar refers to a situation where a person can be high today, very happy, and then the next, maybe after a few minutes, is very down, very low. And then if it continues to play out like this for a period of time, we say that the person has bipolar disorder. So we have bipolar 1 disorder, we have bipolar 2. Bipolar 1 disorder, it has experienced one or more episodes of mania. Most people with bipolar 1 will have episodes of both mania and depression. When we talk about mania, we are referring to extreme happiness, extreme increase in energy level, where the person is bothering everybody, is doing all sorts of things, disruptive behavior. And then maybe after a short period of time, the person goes to depression. So when people swing between happiness and depression, excessive happiness to almost disruptive level to what's it called? Depression, that person is said to have bipolar disorder. You can see them every day in the streets. Some people are just unnecessarily happy. They are just hailing you on the streets. They are banging your cars, they're just, all over you. And then once you go and you are returning, you see the same person is sitting down sad. That person may have bipolar disorder. So the bipolar 2 disorder causes cycles of depression similar to those of bipolar 1. A person with this illness also experiences hypomania, which is less severe of the other. So these are the two major areas that we look at under mood disorder. Then the third one there is psychotic disorders. Psychotic disorders are severe mental disorders that causes abnormal thinking and perception. People with psychotic psychosis lose touch with reality, as we have explained severally. One of the major forms is schizophrenia. Schizophrenia is called, it is one of the type of psychotic disorder. People with bipolar disorder may also manifest symptoms of this schizophrenia. So the major symptoms of it is that they lose touch with reality. They suffer from a heavy dose of psychosis. They are hallucinating, they are delusional, and they also have disorganized speech. So those are the major areas of psychotic disorders. Then the other one again is eating disorder. This is something that we will see mostly with our children and also adolescents. For some of us who have children or who manage children, you will see this one prevalent with most teenagers. Eating disorders are a range of psychological conditions that causes unhealthy eating habits. And they may start with an obsession with food, body, or weight, or their body shape. You've noticed most people, especially girls, who are obsessed with the way their body is, they tend to suffer from eating disorders. So in severe cases, eating disorders can cause serious health consequences and may even result in death if left untreated. In fact, eating disorders are among the deadliest mental illness, second to opioid overdose. Most people with eating disorders can have a variety of symptoms. Common symptoms include severe restriction of food, food binges, and purging behaviors like vomiting or over-exercising. Although the term eating is in the name, eating disorders is more than about food. They are complex mental health conditions that often require the intervention of medical and psychological experts in order to provide a cure. So the popular ones are what we refer to as anorexia nervosa. Anorexia nervosa is likely the most well-known eating disorder. It generally develops during adolescence or young adulthood and tends to affect more women than men. It is an eating disorder characterized by self-starvation due to irrational fear of gaining weight. People who don't want to be overweight, they will now be starving themselves because they want to look plump and slim like their mates. So you find this mostly in high school when an adolescent, a teenage girl is beginning to gain weight. Her friends begin to make fun of her. She then begins to skip meals or deprive themselves of eating because they want to look a certain shape so that they are not made fun of in school. So school owners or parents need to pay attention to this when children begin to calm down. It's a mental condition, even though it is called eating disorder. It stems from a mental state of mind, a certain state of mind rather, because they are trying to keep up, like they say, with the Kardashians. So the other one is bulimia nervosa. It's another well-known eating disorder. Like anorexia, bulimia tends to develop during adolescence and early childhood and appears to be less common among men than women. It is an eating disorder characterized by self-starvation due to irrational fear. So in bulimia, the person tends to consume and then purge. So the difference here is that the person tends to, so it is characterized by a binge and purge. So the person eats excessive meals and then purges out, either most likely by vomiting. So the person eats an excessive amount of food and then purges himself so that they can remain at the shape that they want themselves to be. So it is unlike anorexia, where the person starves himself or herself. In bulimia, the person eats an excessive amount and then induces vomiting so that he can lose. So if this continues, it can also lead to health complications that need to be attended to. And we also have the binge eating disorder, which is most prevalent form of eating disorder and one of the most common chronic illness among adolescents. It is typically begins in adolescence and early childhood although it can develop later on. Individuals with this disorder have symptoms similar to those of bulimia or the binge eating subtype of anorexia. For instance, they typically eat unusually large amounts of food in relatively short periods of time and feel a lack of control during binges. So this one just continues to eat over a large period of time. Most likely they'll get overweight. People with binge eating disorders do not restrict calories or use purging behavior such as vomiting to, to reduce the excesses. They just continue to eat. They compensate themselves with binging. They just continue to eat. The other one we have there is the picker eating disorder. Picker eating disorder is where people eat things that are not edible. You find some children eating chalk or stones or sand or anything at all that is not edible. It's an eating disorder. So whatever is triggering that craving for something that is unedible, that may even harm them, is something that parents or school owners or school administrators or teachers need to pay attention to. You take some children in their bags, you find some chalks, you find some, and then once they are alone, you just find them, slip it into their mouth and they're eating it. And then you check, it is not edible. It doesn't add anything to them, but they tend to want to enjoy these things. Why that is so is because it is stemming from a mental health disorder. So we also have another one that is called rumination disorder. Rumination disorder is a situation where after eating, the person regurgitates the food that have been ingested and then chews them again, either spits it out or swallows it again. It's quite disgusting. After eating, maybe 30 minutes after, he or she regurgitates the food and then begins to either chew them again and either spit it out or swallows it. So all of these things are eating disorders that need to be, taken care of. Another one that is more prevalent with children is avoidant or resistive food intake disorder. This is more prevalent with infants. We have the ones that is also prevalent in our society, which is personality disorder. Personality disorder are a group of 10 mental health conditions that involve long-lasting disruptive patterns of thinking, behavior, mood, and relating to others. So everything that has to do with patterns of thinking, behavior, mood, and relating to others falls under personality disorder. People with personality disorder often don't realize that their thoughts or behaviors are problematic. Most of the people we see on our streets or some of the children that we have in our classrooms, some of them have personality disorders. So personality disorder is vital to defining is vital to defining who we are as individuals. It involves a unique blend of traits, including attitude, thoughts, and behaviors, as well as how we express these traits in our interactions with other people and the world around us. So personality disorder may cause distorted perception of reality, abnormal behaviors, and distress across various aspects of life, including work, relationship, and social functioning. So some of the examples of personality disorder include paranoid personality disorder. The main feature of this condition is paranoia, which is a relentless mistrust and suspicion of other people without adequate reason for suspicion. When somebody is just relentlessly distrusting or suspicious of other people within their circle, the person is said to have paranoid personality disorder. That is the major feature of this disorder. The person is constantly suspicious of people's intention about them. Then we have the schizoid personality disorder. This condition is marked by a consistent pattern of detachment from general disinterest in interpersonal relationship. So general disinterest from personal and interpersonal relationship. The person is just not ready to interact with others, just wants to stay on their own. The person may be suffering from schizoid personality disorder. Another one is schizotypal personality disorder. People with this condition display a consistent pattern of intense discomfort with unlimited need for close relationship and intense discomfort with close relationship. They don't want to be close to other people. They don't want other people to be close to them. So this person may be suffering from schizotypal personality disorder. Another one is antisocial personality disorder. The people with this one shows a lack of respect towards others and don't follow socially accepted norms or rules. People who are just disruptive at a social level. They don't obey communal rules or societal rules. They tend to do their own things, even when it is disruptive, when it's destructive. They don't care, they don't mind. They are just on their own, in their own world, and do whatever they feel like at any point in time without regard for social norms or social rules. We have the borderline personality disorder. This borderline is a condition that is marked with difficulty with emotional regulation, resulting in low self-esteem, mood swings, impulsive behaviors, and subsequent relationship difficulties. Borderline personality disorder. The person is just, experiencing, similar to bipolar disorders, just swinging from one mood to another and is unable to maintain a healthy relationship with others. There's the histrionic personality disorders. This condition is marked with intense, unstable emotions and a distorted self-image. For people with histrionic personality disorders, their self-esteem depends on the approval of others. People who always seek the approval of others, who always tend to seek affirmation in everything, they may be suffering from histrionic personality disorder. So such people need a talking to, they need to a boost of confidence. Somebody needs to sit with them and help them to value themselves and not place their own self-worth on the opinion of other people. And we find this a lot amongst children. They exhibit these traits a lot, and it affects their self-esteem, affects their performance level. They are not able to perform until they find somebody who will validate whatever it is that they are doing. It's a mental health condition, a personality disorder that needs to be addressed early before it becomes a chronic situation later on in life. Then there's the narcissistic personality disorder, narcissistic. It's a personality disorder that involves a consistent pattern of perceived superiority and grandiosity in an excess format. So people who have an excess of self-esteem as against the histrionic. So this is the opposite of the histrionic. While the histrionic needs people's validation, the narcissistic does not value anybody's opinion. They seem to have an overdose of self-esteem, and it affects the way they carry on in the midst of other people. So you need a healthy balance of self-esteem, not an overdose where you feel that everybody is under you and you want to, ride on everybody. So some children have this tendency, and they need to also be managed so that they can value other people. You're not the most important person in the world. Yes, it's good that you value yourself, you have a high esteem of yourself, but it is not good when you look down on every other person except yourself. So we have the avoidant personality disorder. People with this condition have chronic feelings of inadequacy and highly sensitive to being negatively judged. So what they do is that they tend to avoid social gatherings because they feel that everybody is judging them negatively. So when you scold a child and the child just recluses into his or her shell and does not mingle with anybody for weeks or days, that person may have what we consider to be an avoidant personality disorder. So there is also the dependent personality disorder. This condition is marked by a consistent and excessive need to be cared for by someone else. When a child or an adolescent or even an adult has this tendency to always require another person to care for them, that person probably is going through what we consider as a personality disorder, which is the dependent personality disorder. Then there's the obsessive compulsive personality disorder. This condition is marked by a consistent and extreme need for orderliness, perfectionism, and control. People who want to control every other person, want to control everything within the environment. That person is probably suffering from an obsessive compulsive personality disorder. that we are used to. The other one is dementia, which is a personality or a mental situation that is prevalent among people, aged people who have gotten to a certain age. The major characteristics of dementia is the loss of brain function, where either the long memory or the short memory is affected and the person begins to lose touch with either of them. So where a situation where the person loses the short-term memory, they can only remember what happened or who they were in their previous life. And then they may wake up one morning and don't recognize their spouse or their children. They can only remember or can relate with things that have happened previously in their former life. So this is mostly predominant amongst aged people, but it is also a mental situation that is prevalent in our society. So these are the major 6 types of mental health disorders that we have. And research has shown that the most common are anxiety disorders and mood disorders, which is also have to do with depression and all whatnot. Then we also have the other one, which is personality disorder, as also very common among children in our space. So we want to quickly look at the causes and the signs of, the symptoms of mental health disorders. But before that, I would like to pause and take questions if there are any. I've spoken for quite a bit, over an hour, and I understand that I am dumping a lot of information on you. I apologize. Like I mentioned earlier, the informations are so much, and 2 hours, 2 days will not be enough to exhaust all there is to mental health. It is hardly enough. But what we can do is just to point out the basics so that we know what to look out for. And if you need some of this information, I can always share them with you. They are not things I can put in slides because it will run into several tens or hundreds of slides. I consider that my slides are even so much as it were. If I decide to put all of those information into slides, there will be so much that we will not be able to run through them. So what I've done is just put some things aside so that I can read them to you. But if you desire them, I can always put them into a handout and then share with you via email or however you want to receive them. So it will help you to guide your attention to see what, or to begin to look out for, things within the environment, within your space, to know what to look out for. And, so you'll be able to help the children within your space to be able to function properly. So I see that some of the people that joined us earlier have dropped out. I hope that it's not network problem. So I hope that they'll be able to reconnect back. But if you have questions, please, I'll be open to taking reactions now before we go into some of the signs that we need to consider before we can say that, okay, these are mental health situations. So what we are doing today is to lay the foundations. Tomorrow, when we meet, I'm hopeful to get one of a very prominent wellness expert. You will know the person if I mention the name. Maybe towards the end of today's webinar, I will mention the name. And I've contacted her and she has given me her word that she will try to be around tomorrow. So I'll not be the only one talking tomorrow. I'll bring a renowned mental health expert to speak to us. And then she handles mental health, coaching in workplace around the nation. She runs a very well-known Facebook page, and we have been friends for quite a while. So I spoke with her earlier today and I asked her to be a guest, and she has agreed to join us tomorrow. So tomorrow I will share some of the intervention programs as well as our role as teachers or school owners and parents. And then she will also give us some of her thoughts on how we are able to manage and curb the growing trend of mental health disorders among our children. So any questions so far before we quickly run through the early signs and the causes of these things? I do not expect that we'll take as much time as we have done in the first objective. So if you have questions, please just raise your hand and I will unmute you so that you can speak. You can just either raise a question or an observation or maybe a reaction to some of the things that we have discussed earlier. So it doesn't just be me alone who is speaking. We have less than 30 minutes to wrap up. So I just want us to interact briefly and then we'll go through the rest of the presentation. Any questions, any interaction, any observation, or any reactions to some of the things that you have heard earlier? Okay, so in the absence of that, I will move on. But if you have anything in the middle or as we are going on, please feel free to raise your hand and I will acknowledge you so that we can take your reaction. So what are some of the things that we need to look out for when we talk about mental health? What are some of the signs? What are some of the symptoms? What causes them? What are the things that we can refer to as? I've mentioned some of them earlier as I was speaking, but it's important for us to also, point them out specifically so that we do not miss them. But before we go on, this is a statistics that will also interest you. So a report published online to mark the Global World Mental Health Day, which is the 2022 version, says that 970 million people around the world are living with a mental health disorder, with anxiety and depression being the most common. This is a report that was published. The author is from India in marking this year's, which is sometime in October, the World Mental Health Day. The report says that 970 million individuals are living with mental health disorder, with anxiety and depression being one of the most prevalent. Now, this is a scary figure, but again, the question is not just the statistics, what are we doing about it? That is the most important thing. So it's important that we don't just reel out statistics, we take necessary steps so that you and I will not be part of that statistics. So what are the things that causes mental health disorder, especially amongst the age brackets that we are looking at? So I have grouped them into three major categories. And those three major categories are others-induced, or life-induced, and self-induced. Now, when we talk about others-induced, we are talking about the environment, the people within the space, especially when we refer to children. How does parents, how does teachers, how does peers, how does the other significant others of children encourage or contribute to mental health disorder among children? Now, when we talk about the home as the first environment where children ought to receive care and nurture, how has the home played its role in either preventing or promoting mental health disorder amongst children? We find a situation today where parents rightly have to run around to take care of the home in terms of financial needs. But you will agree with me that children do not only need financial need or what we refer to as physiological need. If we look at the Maslow's hierarchy of need, the one that is at the base, which is the most basic of needs, are the physiological needs, which is the food, clothing, and shelter. But the next to it is the, what's it called? The psychological and emotional needs of children. So what are we doing to ensure that children's emotional needs are taken care of? Most parents have abandoned their, their function, especially in this area of emotional needs of children. We tend to just be concerned about providing, everything that children need in terms of the physical, and neglect the other ones. So children need physiological needs, which is the basic needs of life: food, clothing, and shelter, according to Abraham Maslow. The next in the hierarchy is safety. Safety needs is one very important need, and that also affects the psychology of the child, the mental state of every individual. The next after that is the belongingness and love, which is where emotions come in. So when children are deprived at these three levels, they are not able to develop what Abraham Maslow refers to as self-esteem and the cognitive and otherwise. So children need to be taken care of in terms of the food, clothing, and shelter, the physiological needs. They need to be safe, either at home and in school. And they also need emotional well-being. A lot of children are suffering deprivations in these areas. And these things create what we refer to as fixation in their lives. So whilst I was developing these contents, I posted at the base or at the root of most of the mental health situations that people go through is fixation and repression. Fixation in terms of trying to suppress almost all the information or most of the things that people need as they grow up. They are deprived of it. So we say that fixation is a state of mind involving an obsession with a particular thing or a particular person. Most children, especially in this part of our world, are deprived of certain basic necessities of life. And those things have created a certain deprivation in their life, and then they become fixated with it. As they continue to grow, that thing begins to haunt them in life. Some children become kleptomania. They steal because they have been deprived of several other things. Some children have absent parents who are never around to give them emotional needs, to satisfy their emotional needs rather. Some children also are abused at home or at school. It can either be physical abuse, sexual abuse, verbal abuse, psychological or mental abuse. Some of these things, like we have mentioned, are others induced, things that could lead to mental health disorders. Absentee parents, bullying, all of these things are things that can trigger mental health disorders in children. And I believe as we are discussing, you can relate with several other things that people do, children amongst their peers, bullying, body shaming, being taunted every day, or peer pressure that leads people to wanting to do things that are not, societally acceptable because they want to keep up with their friends. Personality disorders, as we have discussed, people who have no regard for social rules. So all of these things fall under others induced. The things that other people do that affect the way we think, the way we feel, or the way we react. Yes, it is an impaired cognition or impaired cognitive ability, but it is an inducing factor to mental health. Another one again is life-induced. When we talk about life-induced, we are talking about tragedies of life, violence, wars, traumatic experience, sickness, natural disasters such as we are having today. Many states in Nigeria are flooded. We can imagine the children in such environments having to go through such traumatic experience. Some children who were born, the last time we had such magnitude of flooding in Nigeria was 2012. This is 2022. Some children have been born after that. A child that is born in 2012 is 10 years old today. A child born in 2013 is 9 years old. Imagine a child experiencing flooding at 9, 8, 7 years old. What state would that thing leave the child later on in life? We read in the news just yesterday or 2 days back of a father who brutally attacked a 2-month-old child just because the child, according to the reports, was crying and then was disturbing him. And then that situation left the child with an amputated right arm. What mental state will that leave the child later on in life? So all of these things are what we refer to as life-induced mental health disorder. A child or an individual that undergoes traumatic situation, either the person is exposed to armed robbery attack or witnesses violent attack, or sometimes some of the movies that we watch as adults. There are some movies that we need to restrict children from watching, and those movies have been rated as 18 and above. But sometimes parents or other adults sit with children and watch some violent movies where there's bloodshed and violent scenes. And we don't regard that these children's minds are tender and should not witness such scenes. And when we expose them to that, they begin to reimagine those things. It begins to play out in their minds. Some of those children grow up to become violent because they have been exposed to such. Some children become addicted to certain behaviors, either sex or gambling or whatever, what have you, or pornographic viewing, because of the adults within their space exposing them to such things when they are not supposed to be exposed to it. Okay, so the other one here is self-induced. Self-induced mental disorders include situations where people get involved in substance abuse. They have low self-esteem, or they have maladaptive behavior, maladaptive responses to the stimulants of life. People who maybe they are not able to process information properly. They have cognitive impairment. The way they interpret stimulants or they interpret information is impaired, and that has given rise to some of the things we have discussed earlier, which is the anxiety disorder. Most of the people who have anxiety disorders are people who suffer from impaired cognition. Their processing of information is quite impaired, so they are not able to process information properly. They interpret things wrongly and give it a wrong labeling, and as such begins to affect the way they relate with others, judge situations poorly, and all whatnot. So these are the three broad categories under which the causes of mental health can be categorized. Either what people do to others, especially children, that lead them to become mentally ill, or what they do to themselves. Some children early in life are exposed to substance abuse and all situations, or children who are not able to process information properly, or like we have seen, situations where children need validation from other people, or probably they avoid being socializing because of negative remarks of others. So all of these things are part of what we are looking at. And then again, we look at life-induced mental health situation, certain things that are out of your control, but leave you devastated, both mentally and physically, and you are not able to process the information. So what we are saying is that these things are a given, they happen. How do we come out of it? What should we do after that? It is not enough to just say this is what causes a situation. After identifying the causes, how do we help the persons to get out of that situation? That is the primary focus of this presentation, and something that we will get into as we go along. So what are the symptoms of mental health disorders? There are some things that we know and that we see every day in our environments. So early warning signs of mental illness are often missed due to lack of mental health education like we are having now. What we are having now is a mental health education. And a lot of people miss the early warning signs because they lack information like this. When we are well educated about certain things, for instance, if you are well educated about malaria, you will not be surprised, or you will not be taken unawares about it. For instance, one of the things that really shocked or affected the world is the poor information about COVID-19. So the world was grappling with the limited information, and the growing state of the sickness or the disease, the rapid spread. So whilst people were studying to understand the sickness was growing. So, and then there is no way you are able to combat a situation or an illness without gaining adequate knowledge about it. So that is why I have taken it upon myself to bring this information to the public domain so that people can be well educated about mental illness. So what we are doing here is mental health education, which will help you to be able to identify the signs and the symptoms. And once we are able to identify those symptoms, we are able to treat them immediately. For instance, we know that once a child comes down with fever, having headache, having body pains, it is a sign of illness. When a child has runny nose, is suffering from cough and the flu, is a sign of an illness. And then, like we say, when the symptom persists after 2 days of taking probably some first aid, there is no abatement, we need to quickly rush to the doctor for proper diagnosis and treatment. The same applies to mental health. When we see those signs, like we have said earlier, and then we see a consistent pattern of a certain behavior, what are we to do? Sit down and wish it away, or pray about it, or do nothing about it, or gossip about it, or wave it with the hand? No, we have to find solution to it. So, like we said, the early warning signs are often missed because of the lack of mental health education. So early detection and intervention is key to preventing a possible mental breakdown. And it starts with being able to recognize the warning signs. So, however, the most important step or the most important thing to do is the steps that we take afterwards. So some of the warning signs is a worrisome drop in grades or job performance, trouble thinking clearly or concentrating, suspicious behavior, when somebody is just unusually suspicious or uneasy around others, a decline in self-care or personal hygiene, somebody who is suffering from, who's spending a lot more time alone than usual. The person used to be an outgoing person, and all of a sudden begins to withdraw into themselves. And then sometimes this thing can be a result of abuse that can, begin to make a child who is naturally outgoing begins to withdraw. And, somebody who is recently exposed to drug or substance abuse, or has, been involved in some unusual or unwholesome clique. Some of these things are signs that parents and institutions need to pay attention to. So when there's a strong inappropriate emotions or having no feelings at all, some of these things are, signs of mental health disorders. So some signs, more signs include having or seeing or tasting or believing things that does not exist or that is not true. So a persistent and unusual thoughts or beliefs that can't be set aside regardless of what others say. Okay, so yes, we may be able to send the slides or the handout to you. That is a possibility. I'll work that out. I will just, so you need to probably, if you are in the WhatsApp group, just send me a private message with your email address so that I can forward you the slides after today. So, or maybe after tomorrow, because it will still continue tomorrow. So we have some more to cover tomorrow. And as we do that, we can be able to generate the slides and send. And then maybe also afterwards, we can send you the YouTube link so that you can watch afterwards. I understand that information may be quite weighty. So there are a lot of signs that we can watch out for. So there are strong and inappropriate emotions or no emotions at all, withdrawal from family or friends, a sudden decline in self-care, trouble thinking clearly, and all whatnot. We also have when a person is feeling down consistently, a confused thinking or reduced ability to concentrate, excessive fears or worries, or extreme feelings of guilt, extreme mood or emotions of highs and lows, withdrawal from friends and activities, significant tiredness, low energy and problems sleeping, detachment from reality, delusions, paranoia, hallucinations, inability to cope with daily problems or stress, trouble understanding and relating to situations and to people, problem with alcohol or drug use, major challenges in eating habits, sex drive changes, excessive anger, hostility, or violence, suicidal thinking. All of these things are some signs of mental health illness. And if we do not pay attention to this or do something about them, they could lead to more severe cases where people begin to resort to self-harm or harming others. So again, we need to emphasize this point that care is to be taken to avoid labeling children with madness, insanity, lunacy, or any of the such terms, or to conclude that there is mental disorder before proper diagnosis is done. So before we can conclude that there is a mental disorder, a proper diagnosis needs to be done by a professional healthcare professional or by a certified healthcare professional. I know that one of the things that we are grappling with in this part of the world is self-medication, self-diagnosis, self-everything. But when it comes to mental health, we must not take chances. We cannot afford to do self-medication or self-diagnosis. We need to allow the professionals to do the job and allow people who are certified to take a look at the child or the individual and be able to do a proper diagnosis of the situation so that we can run through the intervention program or the curative program. Mental health illness or mental health disorders, like every other illness, has a cure. It can be cured through a number of intervention programs, a number of treatment procedures. But without diagnosis, we will not be able to do that. So there are professionals who are certified, who are armed with the requisite tools and techniques or trainings to be able to diagnose and treat mental health illnesses. But when we live in a society where we do not embrace the culture of sitting with professionals to look at our situations, where we stigmatize situations, where we tend to spiritualize situations that requires a simple diagnosis and psychotherapy, then we'll be creating the environment for a more prevalent crisis later on in the future. So as we round off today, I want us to take a moment and pause and consider some of the things that we have looked at today and see if we can share some information together. Just share some thoughts about what we have learned today. What are some of our thoughts? What are some of our areas of challenges? What are the areas where we feel that we should look for, or what are your expectations as we prepare to look into some of the cures or treatment plans that is available for mental health situations or illnesses, as the case may be. So I want to pause at this point and take interactions. We are almost done for today. Tomorrow, we'll be looking at some other cases like I have explained earlier so we'll be looking at intervention programs tomorrow, and then we'll be looking at the tasks for parents and educators. What have we done that have contributed to the situation? What can we do differently? And also, what are the intervention programs that are available? Things that we can do, some first aid programs that we can do or render at home or in school to help children and young adults manage their situation properly. So contributions as we begin to round up. So you want to speak with me, or you want to drop a chat? I am open to taking your contributions. I understand that some people have another meeting at 3, so it is. I've tried to keep to time. The idea was to run this between 1 and 3, not more than 2 hours, and this is just 3 o'clock by my time. So tomorrow we hope to keep it also within the time frame so that we can just keep it at lunchtime, and then we'll have time to go do something else. So any interaction, any contribution? All right, so in the absence of contributions or questions, I am hopeful that tomorrow when we meet, we'll have more, we'll have questions. So maybe I should allow us to digest all that we have received today. Yes, today, a lot of information has been dumped on us, and it's the nature of laying a foundation. It usually comes with a lot of laying of bricks and digging. So tomorrow we will discuss more practical things that we can do. And then, like I promised during the advert process, we will consider some real life situations, practical steps, things that you have observed and probably are not able to explain, and you want us to comment on them. We will also be able to talk on that. Maybe you have a child at school or at home or a neighbor or anywhere that you feel there's a particular manifestation that you consider may be akin to mental health and you want us to comment on them. You can bring them tomorrow. We will talk about them. So I have a question here. So how can mental illness inherited be handled? Okay, so there is the notion that mental illness is inherited. There is no yet scientific proof to that, except in some cases of mood disorder or schizophrenia, areas that involves psychotic disorder. Some research suggests that mental health in that aspect is hereditary and can be passed on through the genes. Again, every treatment, every illness can be treated. And for the cases of mental health, it is treated through a dual approach of clinical or psychotherapy, clinical mental health approach or psychotherapy, which is talk therapy. So you either approach a psychiatrist or you approach a regular psychologist, which is we would consider or call a counselor. Now, either of these approaches, depending on the severity of the situation, can help to diagnose and treat, no matter whether it is inherited or acquired from the environment. All of them can be treated. There is the drug approach, there's the talk therapy. So, and then there's also the combination of both. So as we go on tomorrow, which is the intervention programs, we're going to see the way treatments are, given to mental health conditions, and then the experts in the field that handle such situations. So these are some of the things that we'll be looking at tomorrow, so that we will have a balanced view of how to approach. The whole essence of this mental health education is not to dump information on you that you are not able to use. We hope to be able to relate it to our everyday situation so that we are able to make the best of it, use them effectively, and then on the long run, or in turn, make our society a better place. So I usually love to introduce myself as TCP White on a mission to effect positive change in the society with truth. And this is one of the ways by which I seek to bring that positive change to society. Once we have adequate education, I believe that people can live, and people can do better if they know better. So if you have adequate information, then we'll be able to live better, we'll be able to do better, we'll be able to act better, and then our society will be a better place for everyone. So once again, thank you for your time, and I hope that tomorrow you will join me and we'll look at the concluding part of this webinar. And I hope to have a mystery guest tomorrow, a renowned wellness coach. She has been on radio for several years and running a very reputable company that renders wellness advisory and coaching to companies and workers in many places. And she has agreed to join me tomorrow to share a thing or two on how we can curb the growing state of mental health disorders among children and adolescents. And I believe it will be worth our time. So thank you and have a good day. God bless you.